Some members of commission, as you know, and city administration will be attending remotely. I'll ask that they turn off their microphones and cameras if they haven't done so already until such time as they are called upon to speak. The reports from today's meeting will be considered by council at its meeting scheduled for October 9th, 2024, and the deadline to register as a delegation for that meeting is 12 p.m. on Monday, October 7th. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair? Christopher, I'm looking at you. Great. Any opposed? Okay, I'll presume the motion carries. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the September 17th, 2024 meeting of commission? Sean, any errors or omissions online or? Yeah, Christopher, go ahead, please.
If I may, just through the chair, and forgive me, still learning a little bit, but Martha, you do an amazing job on the minutes, and I know how hard that is. I've done it myself, but the question I had was just really simple. The minutes usually reflect a very accurate depiction of the procedural motions and how things voted, but in terms of the actual substance of some of the debate or the discussion that happens among the commission, is it, my understanding is it's generally the role of the chair to try to capture that and report that back to council. Is that fair to say, or?
Through the chair, that's correct. So for the minutes that we take, and it's the same for council as well as for the executive committee and committees of council, they're not verbatim minutes. They're just a high level that sort of captures effectively any motions made on the floor and then the actual vote. And if quorum was affected by folks coming and going, that kind of thing. And so the meat of the arguments, as it were, or of the discussion would fall to whoever represents the commission at the city council meeting to kind of discuss that there and let council know kind of what had happened at that meeting.
Great. Well, maybe as a reminder, if any member of commission wants to have something a little bit more formally recorded in the notes that I present to council, just send me a written draft, because I'll be taking notes as well as chairing meetings. But if you want something to be put into the record when we're at council, just let me know afterwards to make sure I get it straight. Good point. Any opposed to the minutes? Who's moving? John, yeah. Seeing no opposition, minutes carried. Our first item is RPC 24-28, Airport Vicinity Amendments. We have 2 delegations and several communications. I'll ask Monique, Carmel, and Bernard of Beaucourt Ventures. I believe they're joining remotely. Okay. Sorry. Welcome, guests. I'll just turn your microphones on.
Monique Beaudry
is now joining.
Perfect. All right, so for the folks joining us remotely as part of this delegation, I'm going to turn to the individuals who are in our chambers here. If you wanted to say something, please just make a note of it in case I miss it. So if you folks could, just state your name for the record as well as the organization you represent. And you have 5 minutes.
My name is Bernard Beaudry. I'm with Beaucourt Ventures, and my sister Monique will be making a presentation.
Great. When you're ready.
Carmel Beaudry with Beaucourt, and again, Monique is making the presentation by video.
Terrific.
Hi, sorry for if there's any lag while I talk, because I have it I have the live part on mute. So my name is Monique Beaudry, and Carmel and Bernie have already introduced themselves. We are representing our family's company called Beaucourt Ventures, which is the company that has a pending application for a new neighborhood development that's referred to in the administration's report. We are here today in opposition to the proposed recommendations and to request that the portion of our lands that are in the 25 NEF contour continues to have residential development as a permitted land use. Some background is that if you are looking at the preferred 50-year ultimate airfield concept plan, which is figure E.3 of the planning framework in the appendix of your package, you'll see a property north of 25th Avenue and east of Campbell Street. That's our property. And the airport doesn't need any of it to realize their future plans. regarding current regulations, approximately half of the property is within the 30 NEF contour and may only be developed with industrial, employment, commercial, and retail uses. The other half is within the 25 NEF contour and may currently be developed with residential uses as well as employment uses. That's what is being proposed to change, that they don't want to allow residential in that area. It appears that the boundary of these two contours is about 450 meters parallel to the railway, to the runway. This land was annexed by the city in 1953. Our parents purchased it in 1965 with the intent of developing it. In the 1970s and again in 2017, discussions took place with the Regina Airport Authority to determine if all or a portion of the land would be required for future airport operations. In all cases, the Airport Authority determined that the lands were not required for future airport uses. Beaucourt Ventures submitted the Harbour Landing North Concept Plan and OCP amendments to the city in February 2020 after being encouraged to do so by the city and after they acknowledged they erred in not consulting with us when Harbour Landing was being developed. The plan was developed by a professional planning firm along with a professional engineering firm in full compliance with all existing regulations and policies with regards to development near the airport. The development of the Harbour Landing North lands is contiguous and a natural extension of Harbour Landing and would complete the remaining portion of undeveloped land east of Campbell Street. We have submitted a council briefing about this development for your reference. We are expecting that this new planning framework would either allow our development to proceed or it would be determined that they would need the property and would purchase the land from us. It has done neither. Instead, it has identified a small set of future land uses that are not compatible with the existing residential Harbour Landing, and it limits opportunities for developing our property. None of it makes sense. The 50-year ultimate airfield concept does not need any of our land, so therefore development of this land does not limit airport expansion. Harbour Landing was only recently allowed to develop with residential uses, which implies residential uses are compatible with the airport when inside the 25 NEF contours. And the CMHC confirms this sentiment as they indicated that the study is based on perceived nuisance issues and not a health or safety concern. We appreciate that Appendix D of the administration's report accurately documents our concerns based on the feedback. Based on the stakeholder consultation at the time of the framework being developed. Now that we received the report, with only 3 days to examine it, we additionally add the following comments. The report has not provided reasonable rationale for a 1,000-meter setback for residential development. The report is limiting economic development by being so restrictive in what is being allowed. The opportunities identified, such as aeronautical fuel, are not compatible with the existing Harbour Landing. The report speaks a lot about a partnership between the city and the airport to create development opportunities, which is not founded in any reality of how land development occurs. To limit our development now, after directing us to spend hundreds of thousands in consulting and engineering expenses, as well as the city's costly application process, is unreasonable. Our proposed development in no way limits the expansion of the airport. The report is subjectively indicating that residential development is not compatible with the airport and it isn't realistic to plan on the basis of trying to avoid a few complaints. This continues to be expropriation without compensation. Our plan does comply with the statements of provincial interest because it follows all existing rules and regulations that were put in place to support compatible development and the ability for the airport to expand. Our request is simple, that our proposed residential development continue to be allowed in the 25 NEF in compliance with existing regulations and consistent with how every other major city in Canada is operating. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Now I'll ask if members of commission have any questions. I'll start with the room. See someone about to touch their, yeah? Maynard, go ahead.
I don't know, first of all, through the chair, I'm not sure to whom this is addressed, to the presenter or one of you folks, but, and I may ask this of others, do you have any sense of how you define this or describe this as restrictive? How does this compare to other jurisdictions? Is it the same as, say, Saskatoon or Edmonton or Toronto? How does it compare to other jurisdictions? Is it more restrictive? Does anybody know?
Who would you like to take these questions? Is it Monique that's on the phone?
Yeah, it's Monique on the phone.
Okay.
Monique,
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, yes. So we examined some of the airports, and what we saw is that it is standard practice to use the same regulations as what currently exists in the Regina regulations. It's suggested or strongly suggested by Transport Canada to allow residential development in the 25 NEF contours, but not the 30 NEF contours. The City of Calgary has a really nice matrix that you can look up that really helps show that, but due to not being able to provide a presentation, we didn't provide that with you. Now, some subtle differences is sometimes, like the City of Edmonton one that the report refers to, what it is that is already surrounded by a bunch of business and industrial area, so it's a non-issue about allowing residential. They made some exceptions to allow more business developments closer to the airport. So I don't think that that's a fair examination. But certainly the major cities use the same requirement as exists today.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from Commission? I'll look online. See no hands. Thank you very much. Okay, Monique, you can return. I think there's a waiting room, or you can simply just watch, and I'd ask the delegations in person to return to the gallery, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next
Monique
delegation comes
Is now
from the Regina
exiting.
Airport Authority. James and team, come on up. Oh, they force you to fly solo on this one? Okay. Pick your seat.
Thank you.
Turn the light off. The other one.
Bigger than an airplane, so that's good. Yeah.
Whenever you're ready, go ahead. Just name and organization for the record.
You bet. James Bogus, I'm the President and CEO of the Regina Airport, also known as YQR. Thank you for having me here today. Before I get into my comments about why I'm here, I just want to share with the Commission some great news. If you have not heard, our August numbers were just released, and we finally hit 102% of 2019 passenger levels. So big deal for the airport, and very exciting for our community at large. The reason why I'm here today, and I think the Commission has seen, I attached a letter, or I requested a letter to be attached to your package, was really related to the issue of noise near the airport and how it's linked to residential development. We have had a wonderful opportunity this summer, and prior to that, a collaboration with your administration on all things planning as it relates to the airport. We hired some professional consultants to help frame the discussion, which you've now seen in your package. That would be MXD and Intervistas and others that talk about noise, land use issues, and a variety of topics around the airport. What I want to state unequivocally for this committee is that residential development near an airport is incompatible. I want to underline that twice. The closer you get to an airfield, the more likely a plane flies over your home, the more likely a resident who lives there would be concerned. The complaint itself is not my concern, meaning receiving the complaint is not the issue for the airport. We can receive them. It's what the resident ultimately does when the nuisance in their minds of living near an airport or under a flight path drives them often to do. This means visiting city council. This means coming to an MLA or an MP or writing letters to the Minister of Transport, the airport CEO, or our board to request operating restrictions at the airport. This is not my idea or thought. This has occurred in many Canadian cities. Just Google airport noise restrictions. You'll see them all over the place, including major airports in Canada. I can tell you unequivocally that due to very strong planning by our administration over the years, so far we've avoided those. Our airport generates over $800 million a year in GDP. And those are 2015 numbers, which by the way, we'll be updating this year. And I expect them to be over $1 billion. That's $1 billion of GDP for this community. And the way we can do that is by having unfettered access to our runway. Regardless of my Queen Street discussion in the letter you saw, which I'll be talking with council about next week, I want to talk about what we are very pleased with on the OCP amendments that you're considering. Many of the items that administration has kindly met with us on ad nauseum in a good way. We've met many times and they've heard what I'm about to say many times. We can absolutely agree with. I'm focusing on Appendix B, areas such as 11.14.2, 11.14.5, I think through 8, talking about consultation with NAV Canada and the airport for residential. The matter at hand is you're contemplating, or the zoning that's already been placed earlier this year on lands immediately under the main runway are not compatible for further development. The study you've seen includes buffers for noise. More than almost any leader in this community, we love development at the airport. I encourage development, both on property and adjacent to airport property, but we encourage compatible development. Having more residential development in areas identified in Area 2 or Area 1 within the study, we're talking new incremental development that does not exist today, is problematic. This isn't about putting a notice on title to warn somebody about it, because they can still come with a child because of a 5 a.m. departure that we proudly have flying from your airport, generating jobs. We avoid the problem by not having the homes there in the first place or not adding more. If time permits, I have offered administration, and I'd love to talk with RPC about solutions and suggestions on how we can move forward. Because much of what's been done over the summer, and I want to thank administration again, has been excellent work. A lot of it makes sense to us. A lot of it we are in complete agreement with. But the part that we struggle with is the ability for added density. This is 4 dwelling designations where once they were single dwelling designations in areas that are simply not compatible for noise. I want to close by saying something, because I've heard a lot about NEF 25, we've talked about it in the report. I want to read to you directly from Transport Canada's own document. It's called TP 1247. This is not an empirical measure. This is guidance material the government creates for cities and airports to plan. And I'm going to quote the document on page 21. Transport Canada does not support or advocate for incompatible land use. And in brackets, they even state, especially residential housing, in areas affected by airport noise. These areas may begin as low as NEF 25. The report speaks to this. It highlights them as a color on your map. We're not talking about not rebuilding a home if, God forbid, it burns down. We're not talking about that. We're simply saying, before we let this horse any further out of the barn than it is, please do not look to do anything that would add more density in high noise areas near the airport, or new development on Greenfield near the airport, or in high noise areas. You can tell I'm passionate about this, it's because I care. And I don't want to have residents unhappy with where they're living and ultimately looking to prohibit activities at the airport that drive jobs and GDP, and that's what this is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Findura, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, suppose you're talking really, passionately strong about. So my question would be to you is that the importance of airport to growth of the city. I mean, we're talking about different things. We want to grow. I mean, we want to put housing. We want to bring people in here. But if let's say if the airport is restricted, like you just mentioned about the 5 or 10, and you have to limit what you can do, in your opinion, is the city going to grow?
I have to tell you something. You know, our airport has gone out of its way to attract development. We've gone out of our way to bring in businesses to locate both on airport, and we're very supportive of near airport. We have a GTH that's in our neighborhood. We have a Canada Post on property, and you'll notice there was a letter from Krios Aviation, one of our premier tenants who offers what's called a fixed-based operation. Basically private charter, hangaring of aircraft, and the ability to have flights come unfettered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our community is looking to expand in the future into air cargo. These are not necessarily quiet planes. I go out of my way to attract commercial aviation. I think we've been largely successful as a team. The City of Regina supports this through a tax exemption, a modest tax exemption, that helps actually incent airlines to fly here. It's all part of the program. The devastation that an operating restriction on my runway would cause could be tens of millions of dollars, depending on what we're talking about. And the only reason why we would see a restriction is through added residential density in an area and converting the leaders of that day. It'll take time, but rest assured, example after example can be found where airports both in Canada, the United States, Europe, pick your continent or country, you will see when more residential is added near the airport or under flight paths, it constrains the ability for that GDP part of your economy to grow. And my job today is to make sure you're aware and to hope we can look at some rational amendments, and I've got some suggestions on how we can get there to have harmony. Lots of build, lots of new residents, but not in areas that are going to be in direct conflict.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. Going through the report, talks of, the report speaks to the fact of flying school. How, flying school, I mean, you're moving around the city, isn't just, you come on the runway, but you're moving around the city. Is there, what kind of an impact, let's say for instance, that kind of business of flying school would have an impact on the airport itself and its business of let's say, delivering that kind of service? Mr. Chair?
Through you, Mr. Chair. As we all know, we've heard about the pilot shortage. It's been talked about in the media quite publicly. We are proud to be a host of general aviation at this airport, pilot training, and commercial aviation. You know, your WestJets, your Air Canadas, hopefully more airlines in the future. Airlines depend on the ability to access a runway, but flying schools specifically depend on the ability to circle the airport. And in your report, you will see what are essentially, and they're in broad brush strokes, they're not a perfect highway like your street, an area in which they circle, doing touch and goes, practicing takeoffs, practicing landings. These are not quiet aircraft. Already they fly over, in some cases, built up areas near the airport. And we hear about it, trust me. And residents don't like them. Some do, many don't. However, there are a number of areas that are not currently with any residential development. It'll exacerbate the problem. And having the ability for me to go out as CEO and attract flying schools or look at expansion or bring in new business is dependent on the ability for these aircraft to operate as they always had, unfettered. These are reasonable people at our flying school, but they're doing a service for our country. This is something that we need as a population here in Canada. It's a big country, spans coast to coast. It's massive. We need more pilots, and we should all be proud and supportive of the ability to generate them right here at YQR.
Thank you. One more and I'll be done. You came to us from somewhere else, correct?
Yeah.
You have contact with airports, how they deal with things, for instance, like residential or just the growth. Do you have any, I didn't see it in the report, but from your information as a CEO of the airport, do you have information from other airports, how they deal with things? So when things get built up on them, what kind of trouble they get themselves into? Chair?
What's always tough about this is I've worked for one other airport, YYJ, it's the Victoria Airport. I was the chair of their noise committee. I've got I call them scars to prove it, meaning I've received hundreds and hundreds of complaints over the year. And in the case of that particular airport, there's a town called the town of Sydney. It's beautiful, but it's right at the end of the main runway. And boy, oh boy, did we hear about it when new residents moved in, even though the airport's right across the road. In that case, there are operating restrictions on a cross-run runway for flight training at that airport, reducing its ability to have capacity. In addition, you will see countless examples of airports today trying to grapple with the Housing Accelerator Fund or even pre-2024 zoning and how it's now been impacting their operations. Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton. These airports do their best, like I'm doing today, to meet with council, explain the situation, talk about the impacts, pros and cons. Yes, you get new homes, but are they in the right area? There's a pro, right? Developer makes money, new residents move into an area. I call that a plus, but not if it's in the wrong area. And each airport views things differently. There's a saying in my industry, you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. The reason being, they're all located in different spots. Some are 30 minutes out of town, some are in the middle of a farm field, or in Regina's case, we're actually not very far from downtown. And I don't want to in any way disrespect or criticize the efforts we've made so far to date. What I want to now make sure is going forward, we don't exacerbate a problem that appears to be on our doorstep. Other airports have paid the price, Councillor. I've seen it through operating restrictions. We don't need that here in Regina.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm good.
Councillor Nelson, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm just not feeling very well. Thank you, James, for being here. I mean, I know you work tirelessly in helping us get the things that we get and the economic benefits of it. I think you've touched a little bit on what other cities have done and restrictions. Is there anything that you'd like to elaborate, and now we only give you the 5 minutes, is there anything that you'd like to add that you didn't have time? Because I feel we should give you some leeway, obviously, Chair, if that's all right with you. This is a lot of money. This is a lot of investment in Regina, and this is a lot of stake, money at stake, and the economic impact at stake. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, to just maybe give Mr. Bogus some leeway as to anything he'd like to add as to revisions, maybe amendments, or anything that you'd like to add to us to help us make our decision easier for this going forward through the chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair, and I appreciate the latitude. So I have to tell you, and I want to applaud Ms. Bryden and her team. They have met with us for months, and they have been incredibly receptive to many areas of the report. And I'm again speaking specifically to Appendix B. These are the proposed OCP policies and maps, much of which we completely agree with as the airport. We think they're wise and reasonable, and these are really building on good work that we've been collaborative of for years. The area I want to draw your attention to specifically is 11.14.3, where it states, prevent expansion of residential land uses toward the airport within Area 2. For all intents and purposes, this is really the section right off the south side of our main runway. You'll see they slightly changed the color of the purple, I believe, but for all intents and purposes, this is really close to the main runway. Then it goes on to say, while existing or approved residential areas may continue to develop as residential uses. That's the problem. We've had a circumstance that earlier this year, the zoning has already changed in the city, allowing with what once was a single dwelling property in these areas. I'm not talking about the whole city, I'm talking in high noise, incompatible areas. And now you can have 4 dwellings. Today, not tomorrow's problem, this has already been voted in. We object to that as the airport. Administration is well aware of that. I've shared my views very plainly on this file. We would like to see this go back to, in these areas specifically, pre-24 zoning. But we also are pro-city. We know that there's a fund that we all would like to see our city benefit in called the Housing Accelerator Fund. We're not against that at all as the airport. So our proposal through administration is simple. Just because a program has certain criteria does not mean you can't discuss and debate it with those providing it. Our airport faced a control tower closure. Our airport had its international designation stripped from it with no notice. I didn't just accept those things. We dealt with them. We restored our control tower. We just recently have confirmation from Transport Canada we are an international airport. It took a couple of years. I'm offering, on behalf of the airport, as long as the city supports this, to go to CMHC, who holds the Housing Accelerator dollars. walk them through their own document. Remember, this is the government's document to themselves. Highlight the land use incompatibility that's been created as a result of applying for this money, to look to simply remove those requirements from the areas labeled as Zone 2 in your report. And frankly, this NEF 25 business, which is noted clearly in the report, remember, is a complaint ratio. This does not take into consideration what's called single event noise. This means when a 737 at 5 in the morning takes off generating tons of jobs and social connectivity, if you put homes by the airport or you allow them to go in, it will wake up the children. If you have a flying school turning circles with multiple flights in what's called the circuit, which you can see a picture of in your package, it's going to irritate and annoy residents to the point where you will see them at future meetings if we have too many homes. And finally, I want to make sure that we recognize we are a big part of this community. We just want compatibility. We don't want to create a conflict that doesn't exist today, or at least the conflict that does exist is manageable, but it won't become manageable if we have a couple hundred new residents move in near the airport or under these flight paths. So I'm offering to be the lead of that spear. I call it the tip of the spear, but we'd like an absolute statement, ideally through City Council, that they support this. Of course we want the money, but we don't want to put homes in areas that are not compatible, that will ultimately prohibit the airport's ability to gain investment, to create jobs, to attract airlines, or even to have existing operations that have already made investments operate in the way that they've intended. This is what we, in my view, have to do at a minimum, but I don't want to make it so administration and the team cannot, achieve the half. We know there's good money there from the government, and I don't want to upset that if we can avoid it. Thank you.
Actually, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the you doing that for me. Anyways, I'm good. I have no further questions. Thank you, James. Thank you.
Jordan, is it yours? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation through the chair. Suppose that this tip of the spear plan worked. I guess I'll give you two questions at once, if I may. How long would you like that latitude to attempt that? And what is the plan? What is your plan if CMHC holds firm in the decision that they've made now? Do you come back to us with a continued push to away from it, or what happens next?
Well, I never want to speculate. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to speculate what the government may or may not do. What I can tell you is I speak with my fellow CEOs from across Canada. This is an issue for many of them. We're talking about this very specifically, that we all want residents. I don't know any airport that doesn't want more people to live in the community. I mean, we're totally aligned, but not under flight paths, not under high noise areas. What I really would like is that the zoning is undone until this is sorted out. What I don't understand yet until I approach CMHC is how much latitude they'll provide. But I can be very convincing to a minister. I can be very influential when I lobby or work together with other CEOs to have these conversations. And I'm not the only one in Canada who's got these concerns. A big part for me is we talk about the zoning, and I know that's not for today. You guys consider that, or this committee considered that last round, and I'm going to go to council and ask for them to not vote in favor. But the bigger issue is not just the Queen Street zoning, it's the fact that you can take a one dwelling property and go to 4 dwellings now. I would look for a minimum prohibition of at least a year while we work through CMHC. We would need that time to have an opportunity for the current government to consider what we're saying, book meetings, have discussions, and see what we can find as a way forward. But until then, I do not want to see the current application of the zoning as, I think it was January, earlier this year that was set, be used the way it's looking like it's going to be based on some of the applications we're seeing through. And that ship has sailed, but I'd like to unsail it however we can through process and discussion. I'd like that to stop as soon as possible, because otherwise the damage will be done, more residents will move in, we'll have new developers expecting value on their property when it was never there up until the changes in zoning earlier this year. So 1 year is what I'd be looking for.
Okay, a year. Okay. Thank you. Through the chair, so thank you. I think a year is at least something that it's a number to consider anyway. Without, trying to make too much hay out of this, I acknowledge that I'm not particularly familiar with all of this. I think that I'm more comfortable with council considering the political repercussions of this decision. And I'm curious if on a technical side, you're aware of health or safety considerations, or would you agree with if I understood what the CMHC said correctly, it's that they would reconsider for health and safety considerations, but they haven't seen any. I don't know if they went so far, at least in the package that we've been given, to say they know there aren't any. I think the way I read it, and I'm open to anyone forgiving me, Mr. Chair, that the consideration is that they haven't been convinced of health and safety considerations. Are you aware of health and safety considerations in addition to nuisance concerns, or is the airport's position that this is more sort of long-term repercussion in terms of the number of complaints we receive invariably being expected to lead to interference with operations?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's both. So the perception of noise may be a nuisance, meaning how you feel about it. We have had the luxury of airports for many years to receive a variety of studies from more than just Canada. Australia, the continent of Europe, specifically London, Heathrow, they've got a very significant operating restriction on their runway, for example. There are considerable health repercussions depending on the exposure to noise and how people manage that. Meaning, am I woken up at 3 or 4 in the morning and not receiving my sleep? Are my children unable to learn properly? This is something that has been looked at and studied, and through, not to point you back to Google, through a simple Google search, you will find reams of information that point to the potential of health issues. And this is why, broadly speaking, airports and residential are simply incompatible. This is why the Government of Canada themselves has land use guidelines to reduce these impacts as it relates to noise. There's even fumes from jet fuel. The airport, of course, has a variety of operations that occur on property, all of which generally you would want to put a residence nearby for not just noise reasons, but again, could be fumes or other rationale. So yes, definitively, there's a lot of information available, including ones that we have that were not part of this study, that would include single noise exposure events, 90 plus decibels on a jet blast sounds, for example. The aircraft frequently flying over my home causing, for some, a health and safety concern. And I'm very surprised that CMHC has ruled on this. To the best of my knowledge, they're not a health agency at all. And I would suggest that we would approach them with a variety of reasons. One would be the economics that you talked about, operating restrictions, which is really what I would like this committee to consider, and certainly council to consider. If we need to, we can go down the further route, but by avoiding this problem in the first place, we avoid any potential impacts, health or operating restrictions.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate your presentation very much. You're very clear. Just a couple of clarifications, if I may. Just one, based on your understanding as CEO of the long-term master plan for the airport, would it be your view that there is no more land required for the airport? And I'm only just referencing, and actually I think the report is the one that was shared with us earlier from Associated Engineering, just saying that in their view, it's the position of the Regina Airport Authority that none of these lands will be required for future airport uses. Would that be your view as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair. One of the hardest parts, I think, that anybody, whether it be a member of RPC, could be a prospective developer, it's hard to rationalize, but the airport expands further than what you physically see on the ground. Mm-hmm. There were some detailed drawings, I know, in the package that included height profile discussions and obviously noise profile discussions. So although the airport may not own that land, it may have heavy restrictions to do with its operation.
Right.
So by virtue of perhaps not having the land under our, again, physical banner does not mean that the operations of the airport may not be impacted by development.
Yeah, and we'll come to that, if I may.
But in-
Basically on the plan, as
Yeah.
to 2037, do you need more space to 2037 in your understanding of it?
To the west side of the airport, one of
To
our
the west,
preferred
yeah.
concepts is to potentially extend our secondary runway 0826.
Okay.
So there, yes, now we don't own that property today.
Yeah.
It may not be acquirable in the future, we're not sure, but it's not out of the question that we may look at something else.
So now, what I'd like you to do is, let's just set the noise issue aside, but you've spoken to the issue of operating restrictions. Can you just explain that for a layperson? I'm not sure I completely understand what the concern might be on operating restrictions for what I understand to be sort of airport operating influence zones. Right, so these would be a whole pile of lands around the airport, not owned by the airport, not necessarily needed by the airport under the long-term plan, but you have influence over them. And I know that might even include the Queen Street property that was here 2 weeks ago. So
Yes.
what operating restrictions are you talking about?
I'll put this as simple as I can. Imagine having to close the Regina bypass between 11 p.m.
Right.
and 7 a.m.
Right.
Devastating.
Could be time. Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. That would be,
Yeah.
or limiting how many planes can be in the air at one time for flying training. But the biggest one would be an operating restriction on time. That would be detrimental to our airport.
Yeah. Okay, so that helps. That's incredibly helpful. So there's basically a quarter of land here that is, the focus for today, but there's several additional quarters going down Hill Avenue. Would the basic principle apply to those quarters down the road as well too then, the ones that are basically adjacent to the south side of the airport property? Would that be fair to say? Like this won't be the only property that's a problem in your view for residential development?
So our view is that anything in the NEF 25 and up
Yeah.
area should be
Yeah.
ideally restricted
Right.
for residential development,
Right.
but not rebuilding. I want to be clear about that. We know there's an
Right.
urban area that's already there, just not to exacerbate the problem
Right.
further, would be our view.
Yeah.
I'm going to make an exception. There's some transit corridors that are contemplated in the Housing Accelerator Fund. We had a good discussion with administration on those. Broadly speaking, these are multifamily units in already high noise areas. I think I was clear in my letter. We just put in brackets sort of excluding that. But ideally not to add more in these areas if we can. And if we aren't able to achieve that, certainly the areas closest to the airport, near the 30 NEF areas, meaning adjacent to those, those would be the absolute highest
Right.
value to us in terms of protecting.
And just to be clear, you do see potential industrial or commercial uses. It's really residential that most concerns you, primarily based on the potential for citizen complaint around noise, and then thus imposing additional operating restrictions on you. And then just one last question. So, and again, you don't have to answer this one because it's maybe a bit contextual, but we've seen proposals for industrial developments come here where there's intensification of noise, potential odor, chemicals, I'm really speaking about uplands and around Everest and the co-op refinery. So ultimately, isn't it kind of the developer and the citizen that chooses to live in such neighborhoods? Isn't it incumbent on them to make those decisions for themselves? Like, we were already building in what I would consider, complicated areas, adjacent to very large industrial, and not that you're industrial, but have similarities to, say, an Everest or a co-op refinery. But, what would your sense be, on those communities where we've built around, those kinds of facilities? So, and again, I know it's not your role as CEO to comment on that, but if you choose to, you may.
through you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly won't comment on maybe the other facilities, but I would say we're not so far from an industrial type use in terms of, noise and pollution generated at the airport. There's a nice trade-off, massive GDP benefit, jobs, social connection. So I would suggest it's, a bit of a yin and yang, although we're certainly, I think, more in the positive than the negative.
Yeah.
But in terms of a resident saying, well, I chose to live nearby and that's kind of their problem, that's all well and good until it's just not their problem, meaning until it's someone else's problem. I work for a not-for-profit. I am not the federal government. We lease land from them. We have tons of restrictions and lease terms that we have to abide by.
Yeah.
But our board is appointed, 6 members come from the city. 1 member comes from Moose Jaw, 1 comes from the RM of Sherwood, 1 comes from the province of Saskatchewan, 2 from the federal government. The city has a majority stake. Future leaders can change their opinions very quickly. Leadership today might say, well, hey, buyer beware. 15 years from now, I got 200 new residents, 100 new residents in these areas. They may not feel that way. That's when it comes. And we can see example after example where I would suggest that our job through administration and through good city planning is you avoid those conflicts in the first place by not allowing them to even exist. That, in my view, is the right way to go.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. Just one last question, if I may. Just with respect to economic development on those lands, it's not that the airport wouldn't want to engage in other potential uses. I did note a reference to renewable energy.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a fairly high energy user at the airport and it's fairly sunny there. So, I mean, are those things that you explore with landowners and the city as well as not just the use of the actual airport lands? Like you seem to talk quite eloquently and passionately about broader economic development and what the airport means for the city in that regard.
Christopher, could I ask you to really focus on the issue in the report? Like if there's a specific section, just so we can keep
Well, what I'm trying to ask is if there's no more commercial or residential development around the airport, how much land are we taking away? Because certainly the first delegation said they consider this expropriation without compensation. So, what's the response? And I'm sure that maybe is better to the city administration than the CEO of the airport. But I'm just concerned that you're saying to avoid this, but I think in avoidance, how far do you go? Like what is the airport operating influence zone where we can't build?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think this is why, and I've said it like 4 times, and I really applaud administration's approach on this report. The purpose of building this was not to come in with a big, hey, just don't build anything, we're the airport. We're not saying that. We are trying to provide, through consultation and through discussion, a wide variety of other uses that we would propose are fully compatible. So a developer, if they choose to, could monetize the property, perhaps working with administration, look at how the zoning could be changed or OCPs can be updated to be reflected.
Sure.
And I guess I'll go one step further and simply say, if someone built a renewable power grid and wants to sell the airport property, give me a call. There's lots of opportunity. We have a lot of passengers use the facility for commercial. I mean, God willing, we've got a beautiful harbor landing, for example. I've got staff who drive there sometimes for lunch if they don't want to eat at the airport. So there's a lot of opportunity here. We're just asking for not residential, but we're not suggesting blanket restrictions on development in totality. The only caveat is please don't put something that attracts birds. I hope I don't have to explain that to the group why, but other than that, we're pretty good on what we would have there, and we hope to see that happen. It's good for jobs. We love that. We're pro-development at the airport. We really are. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions from commission. James, I'd ask that you return to the gallery, and we'll dig into the report. I'm going to need a motion to accept communications related to this item, RPC 2430, 31, 32. Can I get a mover, please? John Fundura. Any opposed? No. Accept the communication, receive and file. I will ask Ms. Bryden to open up with an introduction to the report and your recommendations. And if I could ask, slow walk us through, because there's a lot of moving parts in this report, what's changing and the nature of your recommendations. Go ahead, please.
Thank you through the chair. So I'll go through an introduction and I'm sure you'll have many questions and Mr. Mario and Ms. Dawson will provide some clarity where it's needed. So as you've heard, the City and Regina Airport Authority received grants from the Government of Saskatchewan to hire a consultant to draft land use growth strategies near the airport. The YQR land use planning collaboration resulted in a policy framework addressing requirements from the Saskatchewan Statements of Provincial Interests, ensuring land use decisions protect the airport's current and future operations. While the consultant's report provides a long-term vision for land use planning around the airport, this report focuses on the immediate implementation of a policy and regulatory framework to clarify land use planning in the vicinity of the airport. Currently, the City has airport-related policies controlling land uses, including limits on residential land uses, acoustic building performance requirements, and height controls. However, these policies needed reconsideration due to the airport's concerns about residential encroachment and potential nuisances. Additionally, the long-term needs of the airport and their impact on surrounding areas required consideration. The proposed changes aim to expand and clarify the City's existing policies and regulations based on the airport's long-term needs. The study confirms the long-term expansions and operational needs of existing runways, including extensions in 3 directions and greater use of the secondary runway, which it will increase impacts on adjacent areas. In response, the following recommended policies and regulations are proposed. First, the consultant's report recommends prohibiting residential land use in a more extensive area beyond the existing noise contours. This policy effectively prohibits new residential development within 1,000 meters of the runways to the south and west of the airport. That would be Area 1 in Appendix B. While some landowners object to this policy, it is necessary to clarify ambiguities between the existing city policy and the statements of provincial interest, which require protecting the long-term operations of Regina International Airport. Secondly, the consultant's report recommends no residential intensification within existing neighborhoods in the airport impacted area, primarily affecting the Lakeview neighborhood, east of the airport and Louvain Drive, and the northern part of Harbour Landing Policy Area 2. After consulting with CMHC, administration was advised that the Housing Accelerator Fund funding will be impacted if bylaws do not allow 4 units per lot within our intensification boundary. Therefore, accepting the consultant's recommendation would conflict with the city's half agreement with the federal government. Exemptions for intensification would only apply to health and safety and hazardous situations such as floodways, not perceived nuisance concerns. Instead of limiting intensification within the policy area, the proposed policies will require noise attenuation in new construction, land use caveats on titles for new developments, and no residential growth encroachment toward the airport. This approach balances the need to protect the airport while allowing existing neighborhood development to continue. We understand that the Regina Airport Authority has concerns with this recommendation, and we are committed to ongoing collaboration and remaining open to changes should federal directions change. Lastly, the report recommends that noise attenuation requirements for new buildings be expanded to new areas reflecting future airport operations, and existing height requirements are also adapted to reflect runway extensions. This report seeks Council's approval of the proposed official community planning and zoning bylaw amendments to meet the statements of provincial interest. Thank you, and as I mentioned, we will be certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
Terrific, thank you. Questions from Commission? I'll look online first. See none. Look in House, see none. Councillor Findura, go ahead.
A little slow on the button. So through Mr. Chair to administration, as the first delegation, the landowners talked of having some agreements for the land and the planning and zoning so how many years ago was that, or is there a history further than what the landowners would have presented? I mean, they have a statement of some sorts, right? So.
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Mario to walk us through that application.
Yeah, through the chair, so I can walk through sort of the history of that application from the time that it was submitted. So that was submitted in February 2020. That was a concept plan application for a new neighborhood, which is partially within the NEF, it's the noise exposure forecast area, which currently prohibits residential, and the rest would be residential. Through that review process, we circulated the application to all impacted stakeholders as we normally do. And the Regina Airport Authority expressed largely the same concerns that they've expressed here today. So that effectively required us to sort of pause that application so we could come to terms with what that meant for that application and how we would go about it. Subsequent to that, we heard from the province of Saskatchewan, who issued a letter essentially backing up the airport's concerns and tying them to the statements of provincial interest. The statements of provincial interest is a binding document. It gives the province discretionary oversight over planning decision matters, and it gives them the authority to essentially veto or reject any planning decision that the city makes that they feel is not in compliance with the statements of provincial interest. So they very strongly suggested that they would exercise that authority with this application, in our view. So subsequent to that, we embarked on this process, which is the result here today. We received funding from the province to hire a consultant to study the matter. In March of 2023, the city issued the RFP, and in June later that year, the project was fully kicked off, and it went through the study process to arrive at the recommendations that you hear today. So essentially, circling back to the concept plan application, as to where it stands today, it is effectively on hold, and it awaits sort of City Council's decision on this policy to determine whether or not it can go forward or not.
Okay, thank you. So your comments were what I was going to go. The province can veto certain things. We are under the provincial jurisdiction so I mean, not that we can make decisions, but there are big implications so if I'm looking at the growth of the city again, for the city, as city looks at zoning and planning and looking to the future, you would look at certain things or aspects of how we grow, which direction we grow, what's the purpose of the growth, what are we investing in to making sure that we are managing our growth properly. Am I with partners? I mean, there's owners, there are airports, there are many aspects of folks that are involved with this discussion, right? So as we're going forward, so what you're recommending is approval of this. You've gone out there and you've done your due diligence. So the statement from me, I would ask you, the importance of doing what you're doing as zoning and planning for this, importance of the airport, in your opinion, as a city's opinion, going forward, as growing. So we look at 50 years or whatever. Give me a little bit of a couple of words about the importance of, I'm not asking you for permission to do something, I'm just asking us from planning point of view, the importance, like I asked the airport, the importance of growth. I know we're not going to be making everybody happy. We're not going to make everyone happy, so we need to make something. And is this something? It's the purpose of what we're doing. That we're going this way. Mr. Chair, long-winded question, but
I want a short-winded response.
Thank you.
Who's taking that?
I'll
The
take
answer is
it.
yes?
I'll start. Short answer is yes. No, we recognize certainly the importance of the airport and the city and how we grow properly around the airport. And we value the partnership and also the consultation that we did with other folks in relation to this study and how we grow around the airport. And I don't know if Ms. Dawson has anything further to add. I guess I would also just say, you know, as with any consultation and planning, it is also a balance between what's best for the city and how we grow and what might be considered the best by the other folks in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Just one more, I'll let it go. This one will be quick. There was a mention of CMHC there, and then the housing accelerator. I mean, we have to talk about, we're going to be talking about this for a while. Has the city been discussing proceedings of things with CMHC already as we're going forward? I presume you would, but I just want to hear it from you.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, we did consult with CMHC on the airport's request.
Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Other John, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to point my question towards what would be page 2 of Appendix C. There's a reference there at the top of the page in 2.3 that there's a definitive height of 45 meters mentioned there at the very bottom of that comment. Through the chair, to the administration, I think that sets up a bit of a false expectation that a structure can be 45 meters high within that area. It could perhaps be reviewed to be worded that it's 150 feet or 45 meters above the airport reference point. So there's a particular point on the airport that's given a geodetic elevation of, I think it's 1,893 feet. And then it's all measurements come from that. It's 150 feet above that. So the way this is worded, the city could be put in a position of allowing something that's 45 meters if it was on a higher grade than where the airport is, if that makes sense. It would be too high. So I think it's, rather than a sort of number like that, it has to be an absolute limit, a geodetic elevation to actually be compliant. I think this has the concern, I would have the concern that this puts it offside, and there could be a difference in what's approved as to what's allowed under federal airport zoning regulations. So I'll pose that as a question, if that could be reviewed and maybe considered for a revision there.
Yeah, through the chair, point taken. I think the other thing to mention here is that the existing airport height regulations would also continue to exist, although there would be a slight difference in variation if there happens to be a difference in height from the reference point. So in any case, the airport regulations, which is federal jurisdiction, would still be able to prevent a structure from exceeding the required height. Put in simple terms of our bylaw, we use the 45 meters for the sake of simplicity, though.
Through the chair, I think it just perhaps opens the door for some liability with what's approved by the city and what's allowed under the federal regulations. So I'll leave that up to others to consider that. But I just when I read that, I thought that might be a sliver of concern there. So, so my next point is to do with municipal and provincial responsibility on health and safety. So as I understand it, the jurisdiction for those matters would be provincial, municipal, and not federal. So I read with great interest the comments by CMHC on, I think it's page 16 of the report, and have been referred to by a couple of other delegations or folks, commission members already. But that was interesting that CMHC will make an exception based on health and safety. I guess my concern would be from what's given to us here, I don't know that argument's been made, really. Like, I think there's been a lot of discussion about nuisance and noise complaints, And I think that that ends up being more of a political argument and not really one for, maybe for the commission so much as council, but the health and safety information and making a sort of informed planning decision probably, you know, kind of bears on us more and make a recommendation to council. So I guess to pose it in the form of a question, would that work being done prior to going to council make sense to the administration?
I'd like to take that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just looking for a clarification. What work are you referring to? Defining what health and safety means?
Yeah, so I'm looking at on page 6, where it describes airport operating influence zone 1 existing urban, and in the commentary provided by administration it says CMHC will only make an exception based on health and safety and not perceived nuisance. So I think I get it. The nuisance and noise complaints is more of a political and maybe a construct for discussion at council, but we're asked to sort of review the technical side of developments and planning initiatives. So without more consideration of what is a health and safety risk that we would consider to be warranted by in our community, to make a recommendation on that, and then have CMHC throw that into their decision making, I guess. Was that provided to them, or was that work that we should be doing before we go to council?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't think that there's any further work to do on this before we go to council. Now, what you heard from the airport authority is that they do want to investigate this a little bit more with CMHC. What we were told, and in context, health and safety things would be like identified floodways or areas where, you know, we would have potential for traffic accidents, where we have sight triangles and those types of things. And certainly they would look at those as areas for exceptions. So for our understanding is that there's going to be further review on what this means. As you've heard from Mr. Bogus, they want to pursue that conversation with CMHC. What we've said is, yeah, go ahead and have that conversation, and if that results in us bringing changes back to council, we would do so at a later date. We didn't feel that that was necessary to have that information before, because we had a fairly definitive answer from CMHC that this, if we did restrict areas based on noise and potentials of what ifs, then our funding could be at risk.
Okay, thank you for that. The definition of health and safety is an interesting one. Like, I think I'll point to, I think it's maps 9 and 10 of the OCP that look at the airport area, and I think the title on them, I don't have it in front of me, but it says health and safety on them. So I think the health and safety definition included noise in the OCP and through a lot of city planning materials. Would I be wrong in saying that the map says health and safety on it, the airport map, through the administration, or through the chair to the administration, sorry?
Mr. Mayor is just pulling up the map title.
8, 9, or 10, I can't remember.
Yes, it does say health and safety.
Yeah. So I think there's a history of concern over health and safety to do with noise in our community and many others. So I think that's something to consider in the discussion here. I'm going to ask some questions through the chair just on some of the delegation comments that maybe administration can elaborate or respond on. So there was a comment made by the first delegation that said the land may be developed as residential. Is that accurate to the administration?
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently the land has not been designated for residential. It's in a special study area in the official community plan, and further reviews had to be undertaken and decisions had not been made by council.
So would it be fair through the chair to say that this could be residential similarly to I could rip down my house and build a skyscraper if I could get that all zoned? Would that be fairly to characterize similarity?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would classify those as separate conversations. You already have a home, it's already zoned residential, it's already in an approved neighborhood with existing services on an existing street.
Yes.
What you would be proposing is intensifying, and we would have to
see if that would be something that we would intensify. This is raw land without servicing, without a development concept plan being approved by council. So it would be in a different category from my perspective.
That's fair. Next question. There was a comment made that I thought I heard that administration was directing the spend of dollars by the proponent. Is that true? I think that was stated once or twice during the delegation's comments. I think that was to do with maybe engineering and planning consulting fees. I found that one interesting, through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the onus is on any applicant to prove out development potential on their land. That may require them to undertake development reviews, engineering reviews, and without information, we don't have anything to base a recommendation on or a decision on.
Okay, thank you. There was another comment made that the delegation said their proposed development follows the SPIs. It kind of maybe countered what you'd said in the opening on this. Could you maybe comment on that? How one would say it's following the SPIs, and I think I heard from the administration in the opening that it doesn't. Thank you, through that chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the statements of provincial interest, also known as the SPIs, are a regulation document that's owned by the provincial government. Essentially, they state the province's interest in development approvals and land development. In there, it's specific that that land in and around both the Regina and the Saskatoon airport, that development can't impede future development of those airport operations. And so this has been the statement of provincial interest that has been debated through this application that you heard from the first delegation. We have had very clear direction from our provincial partners that they are concerned with development in that area and the impact of that development, residential development, on the operations, future operations of the airport.
Thank you. Kind of to close, I think I heard the second delegation say there was wonderful work on this report, and I just wanted to sort of pick up on that theme. I would editorialize and get to a question at the end, saying I think it was, this is wonderful work. It's probably exceeded expectations in providing collaborative direction to the community. I think it's shown tremendous leadership and further enhanced important stakeholder relationships. And I think it's required superior communications with internal and internal stakeholders. So I got a lot of good thoughts to hand out to Ms. Olenek and Mr. Mario for all of the work that they put in on this, as well as all of administration. I think from my side, I think if commission members were to support any alteration of just an approval, it might be the perspective of the health and safety concern being reviewed and maybe tabling it. Otherwise, I think this should go forward. But that one's kind of not all fully resolved, so I could support that if other members were so inclined. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To administration generally, I suspect we're going to have some similar concerns and questions raised here, maybe in the interest of time before it gets to council, so we're not rehashing the same questions. John had asked some questions that have legal significance. It would be useful in a memo or by way of an undertaking to include in the report that goes to council some of these concerns. Just a thought, but we might save ourselves some time. If there are issues of legal significance, perhaps a formal legal opinion, if one is requested, would be in order, just so council can kind of get ahead of it. Something to discuss later, but if there are members of commission who later on want particular items flagged at council, I would ask that you send them to me so I can advance them to administration so we can deal with them more effectively that way. Maynard, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I thought John still had another question. No? No? Yeah. Okay. Good. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask the same question. Are officials aware if this is more restrictive than other jurisdictions, or how do we compare to other jurisdictions?
Through the chair, we did have some conversation with some other jurisdictions, and Regina is a bit unique just in terms of the location of the airport. Other cities, their airports are more in industrial type of areas, and residential development is less impactful.
Okay. Thank you. That actually is a nice segue into my next question then. What types of developments would be allowed on this property? I'm assuming industrial, but is that correct? And what other developments might be allowed?
Through the chair, a simple answer, yes, and Mr. Mario might have any further to add to that.
Through the chair, it might be easier to think of what's not allowed, which is kind of the thrust of the report, but the consultant's recommendations or background sort of supplementary information kind of goes into what they would see as being kind of a unique fit with being right adjacent and connected to the airport. So they have commented on logistics and distribution, certain types of advanced manufacturing, potentially renewable energy, utilities, and anything related to aviation, agribusiness and agri-tech, and research and development and things like that. It could go beyond industrial land uses as well. There you could potentially see commercial type developments at major intersections and things of that nature. So it's really the more sensitive land uses that are not allowable under the proposed policy, but really anything else goes. Future planning endeavors will kind of, I think, give a little bit more realism to what could potentially be there, and the timing of that as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. I realize this next question is probably more speculative than anything, but I guess it's conceivable in the future, maybe after some of us aren't here anymore and have to worry about it, but depending on what development would be allowed, you're likely going to have adjacent, I think Commissioner Adams referenced it, you could have adjacent residents coming here and being quite opposed to that type of development, depending on what it is as well. So I think in some ways, I'm just looking to the future. We might just be kicking the can down the road a little bit. You can comment on that if you want, but not really looking for a response.
Sure, yeah, I guess to that I would say that we can sort of mitigate some of those concerns that may exist between residential and non-residential land uses. I would even point out that even in the proposed concept plan that was presented within the information, there was a small amount of industrial land use within that. They presented a plan that, from that perspective, would work in terms of interface and things like that. So it really comes down to detail and in planning efforts in the future.
Good, thank you very much. And just my last point, I guess, is just, it was referenced, the Housing Accelerator Fund. I just think generally we've, I know others have alluded to it, but it feels like we're generally putting too much weight on the Accelerator Fund in lots of our decisions. It's important. I don't think we've been, in my opinion, we haven't been largely offside at all to this point in time, but you know, it's millions of dollars, but at the same time, all of our decisions should be about what's good for the city and not, we could do a lot of good stuff without any of that money, in my opinion, and I think lots of recommendations that officials have made have largely been with that in mind, and I think they've been good decisions. So anyway, that's just, I hope I'm not out of line in saying that. No. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jordan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, and this is going to ratchet things down, I hope. I just have some kind of nitpicky housekeeping amendments that I would welcome consideration on, but for the consideration of my friends on commission. The first one is, these are both in Appendix C. The first one is point 9, airport noise overlay. I just ask that we, I recommend that we would, we have noise sensitive developments, and then it says which includes. We can remove part of point 3 after which includes, I think, because later we're adding a definition for what a noise-sensitive development is, and so we don't need to kind of nest it twice. That would be one recommendation through the chair. If there's any reason why to not do that, or if I'm missing.
Through the chair, yeah, we did take note of that, but we felt it was better to say it in two places, although potentially it could lead to conflict, but I see your point.
I'm happy either way. So through the chair, my second consideration, also I welcome administration to correct me on this if I'm missing something. With point, oh geez, now where did it go? 13, where it's the noise-sensitive development definition, and so this would also apply to point 9 if we continue to nest it. I would just consider potentially adding to the list of uses institutional human services, which includes shelters, and agricultural animal support, which would be things like veterinarians, shelter, dog kennels, things like that. Just in that, I mean, I don't know, for the consideration of council and commission, it seems to me protecting shelters and protecting animals would also be part of a noise-sensitive development. I'm not going to die on either of those hills.
Through the chair, I can just provide a little bit of context onto how that list was arrived at. It actually comes directly from the same Transport Canada document that Mr. Bogus had referenced, so that's where that's coming from, and it was also suggested through the consultant study, but potentially could make an argument for expanding that, but that's where that list is coming from.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question, and this is following up with what Mr. Alston said. So through the chair, where I guess I'm confused, so I think you've explained it well. It's my fault, but from my privilege, is it the administration's position that going forward with this plan will not cause health and safety concerns, or is it the administration's position that you haven't seen sufficient evidence that it will cause health and safety concerns?
So we're recommending an approach that would allow limited intensification within airport impacted areas, balancing housing and noise sensitivities within existing neighborhood areas. The airport authority is also requesting the city to jointly approach CMHC to validate their concerns that increased density in the vicinity of the airport is not appropriate. To date, we haven't committed to that joint approach, but we understand that the RAA wishes to pursue conversations with CMHC and Infrastructure Canada as they see a potential to disconnect between federal housing and airport-related infrastructure objectives. We're recommending that the airport report back with its findings, and certainly would consider resulting amendments if that is indeed the case.
So, thank you. So through the chair, so that seems pretty broad, and I appreciate the answer, but that would presumably potentially include nuisance, or if there's complaints about noise complaints, things like that. Specifically, like, I guess in my head there's a distinction between a noise complaint and an actual effect on human life, human concern. And I think I agree with John that if there's consideration about future complaints that might be coming, I'm more comfortable with council making that political decision than I am with us as a technical advisory. However, it's still not clear to me if we are satisfied that there are no health concerns, or if we just haven't been made aware of health concerns. Like, have we done research into whether there are potential health considerations, or have we just opened the floor and nobody has brought potential health considerations to us?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start. I think your question is difficult because you're asking us, have we seen anything? No. And you're asking us if there are anything. Well, we haven't seen anything, so the answer is the same. We are satisfied bringing this forward with the intensification portion remaining as is, allowing up to 4 units as a right.
Okay.
If it's proved otherwise, we're okay bringing that back and saying, can we restrict it in this particular area? The consultants have come back to us with certain recommendations, and those are based on noise. And maybe Mr. Mario can elaborate, but we've tried to take a balanced approach in addressing those through certain mitigation measures in the intensification area. And we feel like that is balancing the interests.
Just leave them all.
Yeah, through the chair, just to maybe elaborate a little bit to Ms. Dawson's comments. The consultants that we hired are experienced in planning in the vicinity of airports. That's why we hired them. They provided no information that this is linked directly to health and safety issues. I would assume that if that was a primary driver of policy, then that information would have been apparent to us. It was not. And the second point that I would make just in relation to the response back from CMHC was, I guess the context and the comparison that they drew was there are other places within cities that are noisy, such as next to freeways and you know, train tracks, things like that. That's part of city life, and I guess they draw a distinction between what's a noise and nuisance versus a true health and safety risk. And if we are making that exception for airports, then why not next to freeways? Why not next to railways or other nuisance type of issues? I would say it's a kind of a gray area between health and safety versus annoyance.
Okay. I really appreciate it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just one more question through the chair. I was looking through the report quickly, but I don't see, there are examples of airport vicinity protection areas, I believe, at other airports. And to use those as examples, I think there's been a couple questions asked about what other airports have, but they do exist at other airports, I believe. Could administration elaborate at all on maybe some of the other protections at other airports that might be good examples to consider? And I think the acronym is AVPA, if I remember correctly. Thanks, through the chair.
Through the chair, I'll maybe ask Ms. Olenek to fill in any gaps that I may have missed here, but a couple off the top of my head that I can think of. In Winnipeg, they do have similar policies that actually kind of reflect what Mr. Bogus is essentially requesting, although those policies are a little bit more dated. They pre-exist the HAF requirements. I'm aware that the City of Hamilton has similar airport protection areas, although I'm not familiar with the details. If Ms. Olenek has anything to add about other jurisdictions, then feel free.
Through you, the chair, as Mr. Mario mentioned, the cities of Winnipeg and Hamilton, as well as the consultants had spoke a little bit about the Edmonton International Airport as well, as they did have a little work done there as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, keep turning on here. Go ahead, Christopher.
Just really basically, just on that point, I mean, just doing a basic Google Maps search of Winnipeg, Calgary, Hamilton, I mean, there's lots of residential neighborhoods within 1,000 meters, so for whatever it's worth on the issue of other jurisdictions, but.
Are there any other questions from commission? I don't see any others, so
Basic level, would you say the city's recommendations presented here align with the study in?
do you need more than a nod, or? Go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, essentially we've taken all the recommendations with the exception of the policies that would apply to the existing built environment.
And if this were implemented, would it be fair to say the city would communicate to all those other landowners in Area 1 that there'll be no more residential potential of those lands?
Through the chair, all of those landowners were consulted through the consultant's process. They are interested parties on our contact list, so they'll be informed of City Council's decision.
And presumably all would be opposed.
Through the chair, no, that's not the case. The two delegations that were submitted, Dreen and the Beaucorp lands, are the two that raised these concerns. Ms. Olenek can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe those were the only two that raised concerns about the restrictions for residential.
If I could, there were a number of claims here. It seemed like some members of commission wanted them advanced to council. There were a number of claims made by some of the delegations. So as an undertaking, I would request that administration put together some numbers, perhaps comparing the noise complaints of a number of other items and how they register compared to noise complaints about the airport. So maybe that's some collaboration with the RIA. If there's any additional information that needs to be flagged about health and safety, I think that would be appreciated. And if possible, in conjunction with the RIA, there were claims also made about the GDP impacts of going ahead with what's proposed in our zoning bylaws. If perhaps there could be a conversation and some data presented to council in advance, that would be much appreciated. That said, I guess we'll call a vote.
Mr. Chair, do we have a mover?
We do not, so I'm going to say, John, are you prepared to move it, or would you rather not?
So just to be clear, based on, through the chair, you've said you have some concerns about legal ramifications, you have some concerns about interjurisdictional comparators, have some concerns about the technical aspects of noise, some concerns about the Housing Accelerator Fund and how it aligns with that and what the Fed's response might be, and we want to go to vote. Is that correct?
When there's no more discussion, a matter is voted on. Can I ask someone to be a mover? Jordan?
Sorry.
Oh, John? Okay.
No. I think he has a question.
At this point, it's only a point of order or something to do with the vote. If you want to relitigate the issue, I think that's kind of passed. Was it about going to the vote? Give it some latitude if you wish to do that. There has to be a recommendation. So you can put on the floor to table it, but you're going to have to provide some guidance to council as to why.
Well, simply it would be to flesh out the health and safety concern that may be required to produce something that would be reviewed and understood by CMHC and administration. Because I just feel like that's maybe not been done. So
okay.
That's a lot of words, but that's what the motion is, to table it, get that done, and then bring it to council.
Someone needs to, are you prepared to put the motion on the floor?
Yeah.
So John is putting the motion on the floor as it originally is as it is written, and he also wishes to table it. So what other specifications? So when it comes forward, what if by next week administration has those responses? But you're still going to have a tabling motion on the floor.
Yeah, we're going to go to, I understand we go to council and decision can be made on it, or okay. I think you could refer it back to get that information.
That would be your prerogative, so if you want to refer it back, which is a possibility, considering you want more information, typically that's what you would say. So you'd say you want, the recommendation from commission would be to refer this back to administration to consider the following.
Yeah, okay. To consider the health and safety information that would be required in order to knowledgeably go forward to CMHC.
If I may, Mr. Chair, is that being moved as the main motion to the floor then?
That would be yes, yeah.
Okay, if you can give me just a moment to
Type it up.
put that into words here.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, I think, if I may,
Not really, but we have if we're going to put a referral motion on, there's no debate. So if you had a procedural issue, that's fine, but we're going to go ahead with this referral motion one way or the other.
correct, so we're referring it to where? Is it going to go back to administration? It's going to come back to planning again? I mean, don't forget, this is
Let's
your...
wait for Martha to put that up, and then we can talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
This used to be such a simple committee, you guys.
No?
This used to be a simple committee.
Yeah. Too complicated. We only got two things to do. We'll learn how to do this better next time if there ever is one.
Martha, do you want a 5-minute recess? Yeah, that's great. I've got to go to the little counselor's room anyway. We'll take 5 minutes. I'll call the meeting to order. The clerk's going to bring up the referral motion. Commissioner Aston moved that Regina City Council refer this report back to administration and then direct administration to work with the Regina Airport Authority to identify if increased intensification could result in any known health and safety concerns according to existing body of research. And then a supplemental report containing the results of these findings be brought back to a future meeting of the Regina Planning Commission to provide further recommendations to council. Procedurally, there's no debate. I'll say that this passes. What'll happen is the report will go to council next week with this very referral motion. If the referral motion fails, then we're back to the main motion, and I would ask another commissioner to put that on the floor. All right? So unless it's a procedural question, there's no debate or questions about it. I've heard that before, and then someone just sneaks in a speech.
I know. You know me too well. What we see in front of us in the original report, this looks like it just duplicates what we already asked to do.
John, that's a debate. I'm sorry.
No, but I'm just saying, so, okay, that's my thought. But anyways, okay.
I agree. It is what it is. So, to that point, I'll call the question on the referral motion.
Through you, Mr.
The airport vicinity, could we just define that? Is that the whole area, or is it area 1, or?
Just the name of the
Through you,
map.
Mr. Chair, that's the name of the map that identifies
I see,
Area
okay,
2.
yeah, map 10, period, so, yeah. So that, all of the areas, or just the area 1?
Area 2.
Like you're out?
Area 2.
Area 2 is
Area-
named
area 2,
specifically
okay.
here. Through you, Mr. Chair.
But not area 1?
Just the referral motion reads area 2.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, my apologies,
Yeah, it's just a
we're
yes or no.
voting to take, okay.
You're voting
okay,
on this.
yeah.
It's either affirmative or in the negative.
Sure, I'll vote in favor of it.
Commissioner Doss.
I think you should.
I'm in favor of the John Ashton motion.
Commissioner Gaser.
In favor.
Commissioner Hopkins.
In favor.
Commissioner Sontag.
In favor.
Commissioner Wilson.
Against.
Okay. Councillor Findura.
Opposed?
And one moment, Mr. Chair. Councillor Nelson. Mr. Chair, Councillor Nelson appears to have left the
Yes,
meeting
yeah,
during
sorry,
the
I
break.
should
Okay, well, that's okay. So Councillor Nelson will be marked as away. John Aston
In favor.
and Mr. Chair.
Opposed.
The referral motion is carried 6-3, and that will go forward as a recommendation to City Council.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is RPC 24-29, concept plans for Padwick Road. We have one delegation, Mr. Hunchak. I know you know how this works. Just state your name and the organization you represent. 5 minutes, when you're ready.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you for allowing me the presentation opportunity to speak to Regina Planning Commission today. My name is Evan Hunchak. I'm the president and owner of Bright Communities. We are the developer of the application here before you today, as well as one of the 2 landowners for this completion of the harbor lining community. To assist with your understanding attached, I had sent out ahead of time a presentation that you may have available as some visual aids to help you understand what we're going to be speaking about here today. I'm before you today to seek your approval to allow for the zoning and the concept plan amendment for the harbor landing concept plan. The reason for this application is to allow for the environmental remediation of these lands and to permit the appropriate zoning to develop a diversity of 2-story homes in southwest Regina. Within the proposed area, there would be a mix of townhomes as well as front drive semi-detached and single-family homes. This zoning application is consistent with the approved Harbor Landing concept plan, which would see the last remaining pocket located in the southeast corner being developed as part of the Harbor Landing neighborhood. Specifically, this zoning bylaw would look to amend the current zone of I institutional and RU residential urban zone to RU residential urban zone and RL residential low-rise zone. If approved, these lands would continue to maintain the holding overlay until remediation efforts to remove lead contamination from the former shooting gun range of the Regina Gun Club is complete. The reason we are rezoning these lands from institutional to residential is simply that it was not feasible to construct a church on the portion of these lands as was planned in 2015, when these lands were first zoned from urban holding to institution. As noted, the extent of the contamination from the former shooting range of the Regina Gun Club was not known when Regina Victory Church purchased these lands in 2014. Since then, multiple environmental studies have been completed, including our most recent efforts to complete a Phase 2 environmental site assessment, where 50 test holes were dug to quantify the volume of soil that needs to be removed. The cost of remediating this brownfield site is estimated to be $3 million or $300,000 per acre. In determining the appropriate mix of housing, it has been a balancing act to find an economic solution to allow for the remediation to occur, as well as respecting the existing immediate neighbors, given that they are predominantly single-family homeowners and have constructed their homes as early as 2010 and on. As such, we are cognizant that a 4-story apartment building would be an example of an appropriate density transition that would not be appropriate, I guess I should say, 4-story next to single family. Yet our proposed density is the minimum threshold that would allow for the remediation efforts to occur. To further expand on this, we don't believe it would be in anyone's interest to leave these lands as contaminated, as the next step in the future, if they were to be left in their current state, would be a provincially registered hazardous facility, thus negatively impacting the Regina Victory Church, the current landowner, as well as the existing landowners' property values that are adjacent to this land. To move forward with our proposed residential development, it's essential that these lands be fully remediated. This ensures the site is clean and safe both for the future residents as well as the current residents in the surrounding area. We conducted our own public consultation, which we distributed 150 information packages to the adjacent neighborhoods to seek their feedback. The results could be summarized into 4 categories. 1, there were questions about tenure with a preference of home ownership over rental. This intent aligns with our discussion with builders to date. We wouldn't be looking for any purpose rental in this area. 2, concerns were raised about potential impacts on property value. Again, as I just previously spoke, we believe this would have a positive impact on property values, not necessarily negative value. 3, some had asked about traffic impacts. We did conduct a traffic impact assessment, which concluded that no significant upgrades would be needed to the existing streets as required of this development. This would make sense as the area was always contemplated to be developed with the existing road network in place. My previous experience working at Dream over the last decade would conclude that developing the Harbor Landing neighborhood. And 4, last, while there's a preference for low density, we have carefully considered the surrounding built form, and just from a compatibility perspective, we do need some medium density to make the economics work. Last, the city had a public consultation which uncovered similar feedback. One additional concern was noted from the school boards and the capacity of the existing Harbor Landing schools. Our assessment of this is that the development would not have any significant impact, as the majority of the homes would be occupied when the new schools are open in 2027. That's it for my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you'd have.
Thank you. Questions from Commission? Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks for the presentation. Just have a question to do with the transportation plan coming through that area. So I'm kind of looking at page 22 of your presentation, which was draft block plan was the title. Does Padwick Road just come around, like, does it kind of goes into parcel F, which I think is outside of your subject area, but like what happens to it? Where does it go? Does it have a turnaround there somewhere? Thank you, through the chair.
Through the chair, I think I understand your question, Mr. Aston, but there's two what were called temporary turnarounds when they were constructed back in 2010.
Okay.
They are both located on the east side of Padwick Road as well as the west side of Padwick Road. So I'm not sure if you have my information packet in front of you or the city's material, but you can kind of see how Padwick Road would effectively enter into this area that we're looking to have the concept plan amendment as it relates to the low medium density in the southwest corner as well as the southeast corner, and then meet kind of in the middle to link that road.
Okay, so it continues, through the chair, it continues to the right of the page and goes back up to Padwick Avenue? Is that
Through the chair, that would be correct. It would be a continuous road. It wouldn't be a dead end. Yeah.
There's two ways in and out. So,
yeah.
Thank you. That was my question. Thanks.
Thank you. Don't see any more questions. Councillor Findura, go ahead.
Yeah, a little slow on the switch here. Just going in the comments page. One comment speaks to retaining institutional lands. Your comments were that remediating would be, or if church, so I'd like to understand if the church financially is not well off to remediate just to put a church there. So, because you can, once you remediate, you can just practically build anything there, to Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Findura. Through the chair, it wouldn't be economical for any institutional type use to remediate that land. Previously, you were listening to comments regarding the airport, and typically commercial or industrial type lands or institutional for that neighborhood would be maybe worth in the range of 50% the value of residential lands. So if you're able to sell residential land serviced for a multifamily apartment, you're maybe able to sell that at $1 million an acre. If it was an institutional zoned land, it's probably worth maybe about half of that. So regardless of Regina Victory Church's financial position, at a $3 million price tag to remediate 10 acres, it would only be economically viable to have medium up to upwards of high density development. You couldn't have 100% low development. That wouldn't be economical either. If you were to just remediate that entire parcel of 10 acres and build only single family homes, those lots couldn't sell for a high enough value to pay for that remediation cost and then make a profit. And that would be why this land has sat unremediated since the gun club closed and relocated 18 years ago. We would be the first viable application to bring this forward as this concept plan amendment that would look after the 10 acres that we're looking to develop, as well as the adjacent property owner behind me that has 5 acres to the east. And for that reason, when the joint use elementary schools were looking at potentially using this 15 acres before considering other locations where it's going now west of Harbour Landing on the north side of Gordon into Harbour Landing West, the school boards had concluded that with city that this wasn't feasible for them to remediate either for the new schools.
Thank you for that. So follow-up question is, just curious about, you have at the council, like your public open, I would say it was a public open house, the individuals asking or opposing, it sounds like they might have not understood what's going on, because like, for instance, like they were looking for another school. So was there a good explanation to the folks that opposed? Because sometimes when you have like 7 opposed and 7 in favor, it seems like there wasn't enough information, or maybe some folks didn't understand what the intent or purpose to purpose that land. Am I maybe going the wrong direction here, Mr. Chair?
Through the chair, yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor Findura. I would be speculating to say that the public was not consulted properly. It was the same procedure that city administration always follows.
I think there wasn't a significant contention with the proposal. You know, we weren't proposing a high-density 4-story apartment immediately behind single-family homes. The few residents that we spoke with, their major concern was they enjoyed the empty field view behind them, and now they understand at some point it was going to be developed, and they purchased their house back in 2010, and now it's 2024, and there might be homes there in 2026 or 2027, and they're going to miss that view. So of those 7 against, 3 had noted that they would have been for it if it was all single family, so that they would be viewing another single family backyard versus a townhouse site. But what I could say to that is we are working with a very reputable builder in the city. It would all be purpose-built townhomes for ownership with a lot of pride of their home and maintenance, and be professionally cared for as a condominium community, almost maybe a gated community. And the density itself isn't significantly high, in my opinion. It would be maybe 15 units an acre. Whereas if you were to look at a rental townhouse community, use Havana as an example, they've built a lot of rental townhomes here in the last 5 years in the city. You would see density more around 33 units an acre, so what we're proposing is about half that. So one resident that would typically back another resident, if it was single family to single family, it might be 1 to 2. That the average townhouse lot would be 20 feet in width, whereas these average single family homes that back this space would be 34 feet in width. So it's about 34 to 20 is what it is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. You may return to the gallery.
Okay, thank you.
I'll need a motion to receive and file communication RPC 24-33. Can I get a mover, please? Jordan, go ahead. All right, any opposed? Carries. I'll need a motion to get RPC 24-29 on the floor. Councillor Findurek. Maybe I'll turn it over to administration. I believe Mr. Fenton is going to lead on this.
Great, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. Much of this has been covered by the applicant. I'll just go over this quickly. This agenda item relates to an application to amend the Harbour Landing concept plan and a related application to rezone land in the Harbour Landing neighborhood. The applicant, whom you just met, Evan with Bright Communities, is seeking an amendment to the Harbour Landing concept plan by redesignating a 6-hectare area from institutional and low-density residential land use to a land use supporting a mix of low and medium-density residential. This area constitutes 4 parcels and 2 landowners. The city has received support from both affected landowners regarding the proposed concept plan amendment. Concurrently, the applicant is also requesting that a 3.5-hectare parcel be rezoned from institutional zone to residential urban zone and residential low-rise zone, with the intent of accommodating single detached dwellings and townhouse dwellings. The balance of the effective lands will remain zoned as urban holding zone. The parcel currently zoned institutional zone, formerly accommodating a shooting range, which resulted in environmental contamination. Therefore, as a prerequisite for development, site remediation will be required. The holding overlay zone currently applies as a means to prevent development ahead of remediation and will remain until the site is cleared for development. The present applications support the cleanup and remediation of a contaminated property, will add more homes to the residential market, and will result in the last remaining undeveloped area in the Harbour Landing neighborhood being built out in accordance with the concept plan vision. Based on this, Mr. Chair, the administration is recommending approval and is happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Maybe I'll ask. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fenton. Through the chair, the removal of the urban holding zone, is that done administratively when the applicant achieves some kind of remediation, or how does that happen? Thank you, through the chair.
Yeah, through the chair to, yes, it is done administratively. It's a decision of council. It's an amendment to the zoning bylaw, which requires a decision by the city council. Slightly different from other applications to amend the zoning bylaw in that the Planning and Development Act 2007 does not require normal public consultation with the process of removing a holding overlay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. I guess we can call the vote.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Adams.
In favor?
Commissioner Aston.
In favor?
Commissioner Gaisier.
In favor.
Commissioner Sontag.
In favor.
Councillor Findura.
In favor.
Commissioner Hopkins.
In favor.
Commissioner Wilson.
In favor.
And Mr. Chair.
In favor.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. So before I call adjournment, 2 items. One, Commission had some really good points and questions regarding the previous report. If I could, please send me a short write-up, a paragraph tops. If you have more, that's fine. By the end of day Thursday, and then I can compile notes and send them to council colleagues in advance, and I can also send them to administration. So you had lots of great comments. I wrote some of them down, but it would be great if I could get them in your own words, just to make clear to council those concerns. The other is, this is my final commission rodeo for good. It's been a real pleasure serving with you folks. It really has. I've enjoyed the conversation. I like planning commission of all of my committees because they don't run for 8, 10, 12 hours. And thank you. Honestly, the due diligence and the focus on what we're supposed to be doing here is much appreciated. And I've always had something complete to share with my council colleagues because of the discussion here. So with that, I'll just call adjournment. Any opposed? Councillor Findura?
How long do you have to stay on it to oppose?
I'm leaving right now, so with or without it. Any opposed? All right, have a good night, everyone.